What's going on, everybody? My name is Adel. I am a sports neurologist at the UCLA BrainSPORT Program. This is episode number 2. We're going to be talking about concussions from a little bit different of a perspective, right? And we're going to be talking about some other really cool topics in concussion too. To my left, Dr. Meeryo Choe. She is the Associate Director of the UCLA BrainSPORT Program. And to my right, we have Sofia Chambers. She is former Women's University of Oregon soccer team. Go Ducks. Ooh. Go Ducks. All right. So I want to start talking about your experience, right? We're talking about concussion. You played soccer. So before that, I want to sort of give your sporting career a little bit of context where, how did you get into soccer? Like you started pretty early, right? Like you were in high school.
So I started playing soccer way back, probably when I was 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old. Started at AYSO. And then I kind of played every sport growing up. I was always a tomboy, so I was up there doing things with the boys. And then my dad kind of told me, he was like, hey, it's time to pick a sport around 12 years old. And I stuck with soccer, played club, played high school soccer.
Like no option. You got to play a sport.
He's like,
you pick one.
Pick one sport. Because everything started to conflict. And there's only so many cars in our family who could drive me to one place. So,
right.
Yeah.
So you had siblings that also played soccer? Or?
I have a younger brother who we tried to get into sports, but he's super artistic and TV, film, all that stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. So how old were you when you started playing soccer?
I would say West Valley Soccer League 4 club I got into at 8 years old and then played up until still playing, but recreationally. So.
Right. So then you start playing soccer in high school?
High school is when it started to get pretty serious in regards to if you're going to take the next step, play in high school, play club, Olympic development program, all that fun stuff.
In high school?
Yes.
So was that a decision that you had to make at like a really young age? Or was it just kind of like, okay, I guess this is what I'm doing and I'm just going to, there was like push from the family, push from your parents, or was it a decision that you had to make? Or
my parents are super, super supportive in whatever I want to choose to be passionate about. And for me, it was soccer. It was my outlet, something I enjoyed, had great teammates, great family support, something I wanted to stick with. And at that time, college coaches, college rules have changed nowadays where recruiting process is a little different. But like I started the recruiting process probably 8th grade. So
really,
that's when
So coaches were reaching out your 8th grade.
8th grade. It's changed now.
And when would they see you? Like how would that happen? Like were they seeing you in like, in your recreational league or like your travel ball league, or was it something different?
It was all club related, club tournaments or Olympic development program, or it was called regional team. Where they would pick players from specific regions of the country who would go and play in a tournament in Texas or something like that. And they would bring college coaches in. So that was a way of exposure.
Got it.
So that was mostly through it.
So you clearly showed promise early on, right? If you're talking about Olympic development and, getting calls at 8th grade from coaches, right? You're pretty good. You would say
I could hang.
What position did you play?
I was a holding mid. Yeah.
Okay.
Attacking, holding, and then kind of depending on the formation in club and throughout high school. And then once I got to college, I stuck mainly to holding mid.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when was your first experience with a concussion?
So I would say the first one, it was funny, a memory just popped up. It was actually on April 5th, 2013. I was in a club game and I took a cleat to the face. I ended up getting 32 stitches, had a pretty big knock, and I had concussion-related symptoms. Never diagnosed, though, in the sense, it might have not been a concussion.
How old were you?
What's the year? 2021. So I was 14.
14-ish.
I think the interesting part of that is because you had a more severe injury, or not necessarily a more severe injury, but an injury that needed an acute attention right then with the stitches. That the concussion kind of fell off the kind of the forefront of what we were looking for, as providers. Maybe you had an athletic trainer or a provider that you saw initially, but even if you went to the ER and got the stitches, they probably weren't looking for the concussion because they thought, oh, you have this big laceration, you need stitched up. So we're just not even going to think about that. And that happens.
We see that a lot, right? Yeah. Like the laceration, that's, a big deal, obviously. But, when you're talking about more severe injury, right? Like motor vehicle accidents, right? Where maybe you can have a fracture, like an orthopedic fracture or something. It's like, damn, my arm was broken and it was just hurting. So like it kind of distracts you from the concussion symptoms that you have, right?
Yeah, when there's polytrauma, that's
Right.
the concussion is because it's an invisible injury,
Right.
which I think will come up a few times maybe during our conversation today, how
Yeah.
it's invisible,
Right.
that you just don't pay attention in the
You don't
beginning. So
realize
you
it.
don't follow right from the beginning what our guidelines would be or
Right.
recommendations
Sure.
on how to get better.
Yeah. So then when did you start noticing symptoms after that?
So it goes back to your point. If I didn't know, first of all, I wasn't educated in that sense of what a concussion truly was,
Right.
what the mechanism of a concussion could be, or
Right.
what is being happen when you can't see.
Right.
So I didn't really understand. I had a lingering, probably headache, a little bit of light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, but I thought it was all just due to the actual blow. And
Right.
like I thought, oh, who knew? It took me about 3 weeks for my face to even heal,
Right.
to be cleared to play, and by then I felt fine.
Right.
And that was the start, or like the first head.
Right. So
trauma
at
that-
14, how much knowledge did you have about concussion? How much knowledge did the people around you have a concussion?
Honestly, not much.
Nil,
No,
right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
like in actuality, like I really just learned about concussion in my neurology training, right? So I could only imagine what a 14-year-old soccer player, several years ago, right? I think right now there's a kind of a culture shift, right? Where there's increased awareness about it and things like that. But you didn't know anything,
No.
right? The people around you didn't really know anything.
Mm-mm.
Had that ever come up in conversation via your coaches or via, the team or anything like that?
No.
And that's a big deal, right? Because I guess 14 years old, you're not in Olympic development at that point, are you?
I was.
Right.
It started at 12 or 13.
Right. So this isn't like,
But not at that. It wasn't with that team.
right. But okay, so when you did join that team, and when you did join, because it's a big deal, right? Because although you're 14 years old and you're young, you're still part of it's pretty serious,
Yeah.
right? Your performance is really serious and your health is really serious.
Yep.
Not saying that, other places where you would play wouldn't be serious, but, there's a developmental program going on for you, right?
Mhm.
So did you ever have that in that sort of more serious developmental program? Anything regarding concussion or anything like that?
We might have had a slide or two, or just awareness in the sense of what one was.
Right.
But again, it wasn't really spoken about until probably my junior or sophomore, junior year of high school.
Okay.
We had a sports med program in my high school. We touched on concussions, but I feel like just who we were with, we didn't have athletic trainers in club.
Right.
We had one at regional and ODP camps, but it wasn't subjected to our team.
Right.
They covered the entire program itself, which consisted of 14 to 18 teams.
Okay.
So we weren't really heavily watched.
Right. And that's
So-
something that we see a lot, right? Where like you have one, in the case of football, right? I hate to go back to football because it's two different sports and things like that. But it's something that we frequently see, especially in high school sports, where it's like there's one athletics trainer split amongst like 3 or 4 different teams, right? Is that something that you think is this sort of a similar case in women's soccer, especially in high school?
Well,
or-
I think this is like a big discussion between male and female sport resources, right? So, well,
it's a huge discussion
Sophia's
to be had.
probably
Absolutely.
experienced this, and having played at the collegiate level, even, I think there was even a big controversy with the NCAA March
The
Madness
March
tournament,
Madness
right?
thing.
Yes.
Did you
So-
saw
Yes.
that?
So it's funny because the exposure actually came, it was brought to light by many division NCAA players, but
Right.
Oregon, one of the women's basketball team players, I think it was Sidonia,
Right.
posted something on Instagram and it blew up. I reposted
was it the Oregon team
It
that
was
posted it,
it
and
was-
that's where it blew up from?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
So let's explain for people that maybe don't know,
Yes.
right? So when you go to March Madness, right? March Madness is NCAA college basketball tournament, right? And usually the basketball teams are allotted sort of a workout gym, right? Especially in COVID, right? Where we have this sort of context where you want to keep people in the bubble and things like that. So, you know, that you see these men's facilities and they're just like these sprawling gyms. They're massive, you know, thousands of square feet with all the optimal equipment. And then I guess Sidonia from University of Oregon basketball team, she posts a picture of the sort of the allotted space for the women's to work out. And I think it was like, it was a mat. It was a mat, right? And then like some dumbbells. And then I think the dumbbells, which like just adds insult to injury, right? The dumbbells only go up to like 30 pounds or something, right? That, like, okay, you're assuming that these women can't bench press or can't curl more than 30 pounds. I'm sure they can, you know? Yeah. So interesting point. Excellent point.
I got us off topic, but I think so. When you're thinking about athletic trainers and in the LA area, for example, there are only, I think this is probably an older statistic, but in the public school district for LAUSD, there are only 5, I think, athletic trainers for the 90 programs that have football, or 90 football programs for the high schools. Now, football usually has more resources in terms of they'll have an athletic trainer. A lot of times they may even have a physician like an ortho or someone on the sideline.
Right.
And I think the thought is that it being a collision sport, that the injuries could be more significant than in a contact sport.
Right. So let's keep it to concussion, right? So whether it's more severe or not, right?
Right.
This is a male sport where they're very predisposed to concussion, right? Now let's translate that to women. Right. What is the sport that women are most predisposed to concussion with? Soccer. Right. And so you could potentially apply that to women's soccer, right?
Right. So you would definitely in the high school level and below, there isn't enough coverage with medical providers in different sports where concussions are sustained. Yeah. And one other point Sofia brought up that I thought was interesting too was that she got her education through the school team. And so there may be more resources in the schools than there are in the clubs. And this is another, I think, slightly controversial topic is participating in club and participating in school. Okay. Because as you heard Sofia say, she got a lot of the kind of notice, you know, from scouts and for Olympic development program from her club participation. Okay. So it was necessary if she wanted to continue at a high level in soccer for her to continue participating at club level, on her club team. But in terms of education and resources, there are more sometimes in the high school. Got it. And I think schools often are trying to balance how do you hold on to, and this is totally off topic, but how do you hold on to the kids who are participating both at club? You want your high level athletes participating on your high school team. Right. And so how do you hold on to those kids? Yep. And I think Sofia and I, both being high school coaches, know this firsthand from both perspectives, because we also both participated in high school sports as athletes. And now on the coaching side, it's totally different, is how do you provide balance for your athletes? Because then you're expecting them to be at maybe 2 practices in a day. So are they taking away 5 hours from their afternoon when they can't be doing their homework? Right. So that's like a whole nother topic too. Yeah. Sorry, Daniel, I'm getting us totally. No. There are a lot of interesting things to talk about. It's really important
because it ties into concussion, right? Like, okay, most of your education, your resources are in your high schools, right? But you're playing club. Are you playing the games in club? Are they more frequent? Are they longer? Is there any difference in the club games versus the high school games?
For me, club games were always more strenuous, more mentally taxing.
Why?
Level of play was a lot higher.
Okay.
In club than high school.
So that's weird. Okay, go on.
So they just changed the rule. It used to be, so I was the last year where you could play both club and high school at the same time. And that was back in 2015. And then they brought in academy because we talk about equality. The men's side had the academy, which was an affiliate, to MLS clubs, and tried to gain them exposure so they can get signed contracts, go play pro. Female didn't have that side. So they brought in the academy for females, and we weren't tied to any club affiliates, or there were some. There's like the Portland Thorns had a academy team.
And that's regarded as club, or is that So that's club. That's what we mean when we say club, right? Is this academy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So clubs became academy, but you couldn't play high school at the same time if you played academy. Both men and
So
male
this
and
is going
female.
on at the same season?
And they purposely do it so you can't do both.
That's kind of BS.
I mean, as someone who played both high school and club, I looked forward to
That's
high
brutal,
school.
man.
Yeah.
That is brutal. So in high school, there was a time where I was playing basketball, baseball, and soccer all at the same time. I don't know how the hell it lined up, right? But like, it was insane. I would go from like 3:45 after I got out of school all the way till 9 o'clock at night. And at the end, it was just so exhausting, right? So I could only, and that wasn't even games. That was just practice, right? So like, I can only imagine would you ever have like back-to-back games?
So now they allow the girls to play both high school and club at the same time. So girls that I'm currently coaching are playing 2 games on the weekend, and we just started league. So let's say they played a game on Saturday. They might have a game Sunday, depending on the league.
Okay.
We have a league game Monday, which was yesterday. So we had a league game on Monday.
Right.
We had practice Tuesday. We had a league game Wednesday. Then they're off Thursday, Friday from high school, but they still have club practice Thursday. Friday's off, and they can play again Saturday, Sunday. So as a high school coach, because, I mean, I'm very fortunate at the high school that I work at. We have incredible players on our team who are at an incredible level. Some girls are on the national team, women's youth national teams.
Right.
So we can manage time accordingly and spread playing time throughout to make it so it's not too taxing and overworking our players at, what are they, 17, 18 years old?
Right.
Whereas other high schools probably don't have that ability to do so. Like my high school, I was playing club and high school at the same time, but club would back off a little bit. I don't know how much club is backing off nowadays.
So I think that there's been a big push, I know, in MLS to have a developmental program, right? Because that's why Europe has such good players, right? That's why Barcelona has amazing players. That's how you get a Lionel Messi, right? It's because you get them really young, right? Like when was Messi signed to Barcelona? I don't know, but I think like all these players are signed at like 12 years old, right? And they just go through this rigorous system of development. And then out the other end comes like Lionel Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo, like all these amazing players. And that's how you get them, right?
Correct.
So I think that MLS has been kind of doing that, right? And I think that, women's is doing that too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So then you get scouted, you go to Oregon, right? And then I think you go through your career at Oregon, you have several concussions throughout your career, right? And then you come to a place where you're going into your senior year, and I think you suffer another concussion right before, and then the sports med doc at University of Oregon says, we are retiring you, right? Like we're not going to allow you to play your senior year.
Yeah.
Which is big.
Yeah, no.
Right?
So what happened was I had a couple concussions throughout, one more major one in high school. And then I want to say I had one almost every season in college, and maybe one during season and one in the springtime, or as what we deemed as a concussion based off my baselines and impact tests and stuff like that. But that was all through my athletic trainer, and the doctors that we had in-house at Oregon.
Right.
And then my junior year, I sustained a concussion. I think I was going up for a header. My teammate bumped me while I was in the air. I took an elbow to the temple, and I fell and hit my head on the ground. Oh, that was one. Okay. No. Sorry. That was my sophomore year. My junior year, I was in a game. That's what it was. I was in a game, and I went up for a header, and I either got headbutted in the back or I hit the back of my head on the ground. I don't remember which one it was.
You were a big header.
As a midfielder, that's your duty.
Key.
You're winning aerial
midfield.
Balls, so punts that are skyrocketed or blasted at your head.
Right.
You're expected to win those, and you can't let it bounce.
Right.
And
we'll talk about those a little bit later because I think it's such a huge topic in women's sports, right? In women's soccer right now. But go on. And then I immediately walked off the field or came off, and I didn't feel right. Felt a little disoriented, and I've had them enough where I just know to pull myself out of the situation. Whereas before in high school, I played through a game, don't remember the second half of the game, and I pushed through. Right.
So I learned head's most important, my brain, for what I want to do in the future, whatnot. I'm going to pull myself out.
Right.
So I came off. I was scat, baseline, impact.
Yeah.
headache, sensitivity to light, sensitivity to sound, disoriented, really incredibly fatigued, maybe slightly nauseous.
Yeah.
And those symptoms lingered for about 3 months. So that was the springtime of my junior year. And that's when I made an appointment to come see you. And basically in that time at school, when I wasn't doing anything, wasn't playing any or practices spring soccer, my athletic trainers at the time were like, hey, like you've had a number of them and it's taking you longer and longer to recover each time. I think it's time that we shut it down and call it a day and hang your boots.
Your AT told you that? AT
as well as the head doc at Oregon.
The head team doc?
Team doc.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
I had established a relationship with my athletic trainer, so I know she understood how I felt and she could see it visibly when I was a little disoriented or didn't look right. So I could kind of trust her on that, and I knew when she said it, her words were really impactful.
Right. So I don't think it was a question as to whether you had a concussion or not, right? I think it was like I'm trying to like get into.
Yeah.
So you've gone like your entire life, right? You're a soccer player, right? And then you get up to that, maybe that climactic moment where you're senior year captain, right? You're leading your team, and then this crap that keeps happening to you, these concussions, right? They just keep happening to you potentially, have now sidelined you. And then now you're being told that, you're not going to play your senior year.
And that also plays into a factor. So mentally, I mean, I grew up a soccer player, right? So that becomes ingrained and part of your identity.
Right.
So immediately then you're like, okay, what would I be if I'm not a soccer player? Right. Who is Sofia Chambers when she's not a soccer player?
You know what? I in the first episode with Earl Watford, we went over this a lot too. And I think it's so important, right? It's so important to consider, right? It's like when a career athlete, right? And extensive times, right? Like how many years? 13, 14 to 21, right? It's 7 years of being a soccer player, right? An intense soccer player. I had a similar experience like that where all of a sudden I wasn't an athlete anymore. And it was like, and I talked about this a little bit before in the last episode where it's like, then you don't know who you are, right? And then, you wander around thinking about, who am I? And then you live this sort of like purposeless life, right? And then whereas prior to that, you had so much purpose, right? And you had your community and you had your family, all of which centered around this sort of sports stuff. And then all of a sudden it's like, no more, right?
Yeah.
And to me, I kind of saw it coming, right? I think with some athletes, you can see it coming where you're no longer going to be part of that community. But for you, it looked like the rug was just pulled out from under you, right?
Yeah. And for that, I mean, I not only was having symptoms at the time, but then how can you differentiate between a stress-induced moment, feeling constantly depressed, stressed?
You felt depressed?
That time, yeah. Oh yeah. And
I mean, it's typical. It's not I don't think it's something that we should frown about anymore. You know what I mean? Like, no, because there's been a history of that, right? Especially in athletes, right? You're depressed and these sort of psychiatric issues. Like it's been sort of something that's kind of been avoided, right? The big elephant in the room. But
100%.
I think athletes go through that all the time. I myself went through that.
Exactly.
Right?
It's something that, a topic that's continued to be discussed that needs to be brought light to and continue to gain exposure because it's so incredibly important. And it's a huge factor in not only athletic performance and athletes, but their daily life, which is, for me, I wear my heart on my sleeve. So I'm open to any topic. Like I will gladly tell you how I'm feeling.
Right.
And that was something I never hid.
Yeah.
So my athletic trainers knew, my parents knew, my family knew. And that was a really big controversy too, is just not controversy, conversation. Like what at the time I wanted to go to med school. I wanted to be a doctor. So I was like, I'm putting that first.
So you weren't interested in national team or any of that. You were like Oregon, and then after Oregon,
with how many injuries I had sustained,
like,
whether that's body or head, I was like, I've been through, and mentally too. College game, mentally, it's rough.
Right.
And that also plays along when we talk about with depression and whatnot.
Sure.
And for me, it was great. I had a great run.
Right.
And I was okay leaving it behind when I was ready to leave it behind
on your terms,
on my terms.
And then because that's the thing, you saw it coming in, and all of a sudden you meet with this guy and he tells you, and correct me if I'm mistaken, you meet with this guy and he says, no, like it stops now.
Hey,
it doesn't.
Hey, I just want to say team doc could be a woman.
What does that have anything to do with
You just
it?
said he. You met with this guy and he said.
I can't believe you're going to call me out like that in front of everybody.
Hey. Come on.
We're gonna be editing that out. I hope you know that. I hope you relish it as much as you do right now.
I was thinking at least
your
athletic trainer is a
female.
A woman.
Yes,
She
yes.
already said woman.
The AT was
AT
right.
is a female.
What was your sports doc?
Our sports doc was a male, but it could have
easily been a woman. There are women sports docs, just like there are women sports neurologists.
Right, I agree. 100%. Oh my gosh.
I think you have to leave that in there. Can't edit that out.
Yes, 100%.
Zoom in on.
We're editing this out. Okay. All right, back to the topic at hand, Dr. Choe. So then you get told, all right, it stops now.
So immediately I called BrainSPORT, and I've had a history and had a rapport with you and Dr. Giza. Fortunate enough so, because if I didn't have that relationship, they would have shut me down right there. And because I had established and had seen BrainSPORT before, they allowed me.
What's your response when he tells you that?
I just kind of, honestly, I didn't think I said anything. I just kind of sat there in shock. I didn't think this moment would actually happen, but it was kind of one of those where everyone was kind of beating around the bush for about a month about whether to say it or not.
Sure.
Everyone's like, how are you feeling?
You felt that.
Yeah. And my athletic trainer was kind of like, so if I don't know anymore, is it worth it? And, that's always floating in the back of my mind.
Easing you into.
And I'm just like, like I have a good home base, and I know that if I go back home and see BrainSPORT, I will have an answer that I could trust.
Because you had seen us, not us, because I wasn't part of it, but you had seen Dr. Choe and Dr. Giza at BrainSPORT previously due to your prior concussion.
Correct.
Right? So then you tell them.
I said, I don't want to make a decision until I see Dr. Choe or Dr. Giza.
So they left it up to you to make the decision. They weren't just going to shut you down.
They were going to shut me down if I didn't have a relationship. Or that was where it was heading for sure.
So they were like,
because I've had this.
Okay, because you told them, why don't you let me go speak to UCLA BrainSPORT? I'm guessing they knew about UCLA BrainSPORT, right?
They knew through me.
They knew through you that you had seen them before for your concussions.
They've also been at, you guys have had
we've been
seminars in Pac-12.
We've been to Pac-12.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, they've been.
So they're like, all right, go see them.
Correct.
And then they'll make the final call.
So we made an appointment, and they're like, okay, that's the day. We'll know then. But I actually went through and did the 8-hour neuropsych testing.
Right.
Went through all that, and then did I see you or Dr. Giza? I think I saw you both, actually.
I think probably you did see us both.
I think I saw you guys both.
Were you a fellow in the program at that time?
No.
Or you were
faculty.
You were faculty.
I'm really old.
No, you were not.
No, you're not. So someone comes to you and says, I've had several concussions. They want to, my sports med doc wants to retire me, right? And, that person happens to be a University of Oregon captain of the women's soccer team entering her senior year. What are some kind of things that you're considering and that you're factoring into making that decision? 'Cause that's a big decision, right?
So for me as a provider who takes care of a lot of athletes,
right,
it's never my decision. It has to be like, I will tell you what I think, and these are my recommendations, but it can't be I'm deciding. Otherwise, Sofia would have never come back to me if I were the kind of doctor who practiced in a paternalistic way and said, this is what you're doing.
Right.
She came back to us because she trusted us, because she knew that we make decisions together with our patients.
Right.
We can advise them and educate them and tell them what we think might be the best path forward. Once we get all the information, Sofia mentioned that she had the full neuropsych battery, the 8 hours testing, and that's one of the things that we look at. So we get as much objective data as we can. So the neuropsych testing helps us see where, a patient is cognitively. Right. And we didn't have like an 8-hour baseline test for Sofia, but she's a, senior in college. She's high achieving, not only on the field, but also academically. Yeah. So we have kind of an expectation, and they can do kind of a look back at, these were her high school grades, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Neuropsych testing. We get imaging. So I think probably we got imaging for Sofia just to make sure on her MRI there aren't any signs that, there was some injury structurally that we didn't know about, but that could have been.
Did you do an MRI or did you did an MRI or did you do the DTI?
I did not do the DTI.
You didn't do DTI?
But I had a baseline MRI, I think like my freshman or sophomore year of
right,
college.
Because you've had head injuries in the past.
And then I had one that
and probably like, so we want to look at, a couple different sequences, but we're looking for any kind of signs of like small bleeds or things like that on an SWI. So, and so we would obtain that in the case of an athlete who was having this question about retirement. And the question it isn't always someone at Sofia's level or even beyond Sofia's level at the like professional sport level. Even when we're looking at kids who may be, in junior high or at whatever level they are, whenever their parents come to us with that question or they themselves come to us with that question, then we want these objective tests. We do a full neurologic exam and, we'd seen Sofia before, so we knew what her baseline was. And then once we have all that information, we sit down together and we say, hey, look, this is what the data looks like. There are some clear-cut times that we would say, probably best if you retire. So one, she mentioned already, I think that her athletic trainer was noticing that her injuries were coming closer and closer together.
The injuries were coming closer and closer together?
Or that she was at least having one every season.
I had one every season. Either it was like I would have one in fall and then it would take a little bit. Or if it was even just like a little knock to the head and I felt, which at the time we couldn't differentiate anything. We didn't really understand until I visited you that last time.
Right.
I'd get hit. I'd go for a header.
Right.
And I'd have light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, and a really bad headache.
Okay.
After the game, and then I was almost getting baseline tested or scat tested after every game, just because I would have it wasn't every game, but pretty frequently throughout the season.
Frequently, right.
And we would establish based off then, like if I would play the next game, or I'd take a couple days off, let my symptoms calm down a little bit, and then go back. But we didn't treat it as
so iffy.
So that's like the lower threshold. So we talked about closer, so like increased frequency basically, but shorter duration. Then one is threshold. So if a lower threshold, which didn't used to cause concussion symptoms, was starting to cause concussion symptoms. She didn't used to have headaches every time
like
she went out
in
for
high
a
school,
header.
right? In high school, you would do that and it was fine, right?
Yeah.
Like you were heading and doing all sorts of stuff.
We didn't even think twice about it.
So that's another probably time when you would say, maybe time to hang up the cleats.
Right.
And then a third. So those were two. Third, if we saw anything on the objective testing that we got, so anything on MRI or anything in the neurocognitive testing. And then if it's taking longer for her to get better in between, or a patient to get better.
Right.
The thing that's a little bit confusing, I think, in what Sofia is saying is that so she would go up for a header and she would have headache and light sensitivity. And as you know, you can have like just an impact migraine, right? That can spark off a migraine. And we don't know, because migraines come about at the same time that concussions start happening to kids, whether Sofia was just going to get migraines to begin with. If she had never been a soccer player, had never had a concussion, she may still have had migraines. And so we don't know if that was also muddying the picture, which is, I think, is maybe.
That was like a big factor leaving there too, because we looked at the testing and everything was either above average or average. So there was no neurocognitive
no testing.
Deficits or anything that stuck out.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like I was in a mental fog. I wasn't fatigued. That's when I know, like
when you're fatigued, but you were just having like these headaches, light sensitivity.
Yes.
And that's the thing, right? Like it's so non-specific, these symptoms, right? That you have when you have a concussion, that they could be like really pretty much anything, right? Like, so what ended up happening?
So we ended up having our conversation and I left feeling incredibly confident. And it's funny because I felt a lingering headache going in. I wasn't really doing much exercise, which we found detrimental to me when I was getting on the bike, doing a little bit more. As long as my symptoms were increasing by X amount, I was actually improving over the time when I was incorporating a little bit of physical activity.
Right.
So what
did BrainSPORT tell you at the end, like towards the end when it was like, okay, am I retiring or am I not? What are your recommendations?
Leaving that conversation, it was, I'm going to play my senior year.
Okay.
But out of respect, or not respect, but out of forethought for myself, it will be my last season.
Okay.
And I'm going to adjust my play.
Okay.
So minimizing as many head impacts as possible.
Okay.
And that being said, I had informed my coach, and she's like, okay, any heading drill we do during practice, you're not doing
it.
Any crossing and finishing a ball in the air, duck out of the way.
Right.
If you're in a game situation, I would like for you to score.
Now, was that because there was a sense that you were having concussions, or that was causing you to have a migraine, which sucks, right? Like, you don't want to have a migraine. You don't want to be playing with a migraine because you can't optimally perform.
It was
right?
migraine and inducing a migraine.
It was induced migraine.
Correct.
It wasn't every time you had a ball,
Correct.
you're having a concussion.
Correct.
Every single game.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, it was just adjusting my play.
Right.
And knowing that that's what it was, and not me causing any structural damage.
Right.
When I would go up I probably headed the ball 4 or 5 times in season.
Right.
I tried not to. And as a midfielder, you just switch positions with someone or use your body to shield the ball, chest, bring it down, whatever.
How relieved were you?
And that was the biggest thing. Immediately, my headache kind of went away. The stress, I carry stress pretty heavily, and I hide it as well.
Yeah.
I try my best to hide it, I should say.
Yeah.
But it was an immediate relief once I heard that. Leaving that visit was probably one of the most, just a sigh of relief, as I said before, coming from the body, from my parents as well, because they were there as well. And for them, that was like the biggest breath of fresh air that anyone could feel, knowing that their kid wasn't having these
concussions.
Yeah, and they don't know. They're not well informed in the medical field. They're in the film business doing other stuff. So obviously they do their research, but they don't understand at a physiological level.
Yeah.
So for them, that was a big relief. And knowing that my parents were okay, as well as me, I was just like, okay, like, one season, let's just have fun. I got nothing to lose.
Right.
So
how'd that last season go? Did you have another concussion or no?
I did not. I did not. A
bunch of migraines, maybe, but no
I did have a couple, but
a couple migraines.
couple.
right.
No concussions.
And a lot of fun.
And a lot of fun.